Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Davidson Squibb. I'm the head of Research and Learning Services at the library, and I have the pleasure of introducing Rebecca Gourevitch, who created the documentary Holding Out that we'll be viewing and discussing today. Rebecca is our colleague at the UC Merced Library and our project archivist for the California Agricultural Resources Archive, known as CARA. And the CARA team under Rebecca's direction is doing excellent work at making the historic records from California's cooperative extension offices digitized and available online. And you can visit our news section to see blog postings by Rebecca about this work. Before joining us in 2020, Rebecca received a BA in sociology and did 2 master's programs, one in social documentation at UC Santa Cruz and another in photographic preservation and collections at the University of Rochester. In addition, Rebecca has been a tenant organizer in San Francisco, a Human Rights Center fellow at UC Berkeley, and a junior fellow at the Library of Congress. And I'll let Rebecca say more about these experiences, some of which really informed her documentary making. And as an aside, I'll say that we're also planning an event in the spring with Rebecca's documentary that can focus even more deeply into the issue of housing. And we plan to also have some panelists who can talk about that and the housing situation locally. And with that, I will turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for coming to this event. I thought I would just share a little bit of background as to how I came to make this film. In 2011, I started working at the San Francisco Tenants Union, which is a nonprofit in San Francisco that has been fighting for the rights of tenants as well as the preservation of affordable housing since the 1970s. And my time there was a critical period for renters that witnessed an increase in evictions and a vast transformation of the landscape due to gentrification and what has been dubbed the tech boom 2.0, in which an expanding tech economy brought in a younger and wealthier population to San Francisco. So I left the Tenants Union to attend graduate school at UC Santa Cruz in a program called Social Documentation. And I decided to make a documentary film there on the eviction and displacement crisis in the city. At the time, there was a lot of news coverage on these events, but many of the media works produced had very short clips or just featured a lot of numbers or statistics about the situation. And as someone very interested in oral history practices and archives, I really wanted to make something that delved deeper into the lives of those affected by the housing crisis. I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions after the film, which will last about 20 minutes. Thanks.
San Francisco. Within its 45 square miles is contained one of the most colorful and romantic cities in the world. Approaching from the south, the traveler views with sudden excitement the city thrusting its white towers into the blue California sky. But it is from the east that the city reveals its famous profile, framed by the silver towers of the Bay Bridge.
Here, I'm continuing my coverage on what seems to be this never-ending tech boom that we are living in right now and its massive effect on housing in the Bay Area. Tonight, we hear from San Francisco families that are being pushed out due to this tech boom.
My immediate neighborhood, and I think of my immediate neighborhood as being like about 4 blocks here, it was about 98% Italian. I wanted to become a member of this community, and and I wasn't sure how that was going to, what the welcoming would be. Certainly some people knew me from my work at the Telegraph Hill Neighborhood Center, which is a block from my home. So I could leave my home hearing the first bell from Saints Peter and Paul and arrive at my workplace by the 9th bell. It was an established traditional community, and I knew I couldn't just walk in. I would need to be an observer, and when they were ready to welcome me in, then I was looking forward to that. I got a call from Polly Molinari, and she lived right across the street in the beige building, and she said, hey, you still looking for a place? In that beautiful old North Beach dialect and melody, and said, because you know what, they're just carrying Mr. Tarantino out now. 5 minutes later, I got a call from Virginia asking if I could come up and look at it. I went up during my lunch break. She gave me a tour, said, I'd like you to move in here. Yeah, she was a friend. She was one of those people where we could get mad at each other. And when she would say, just give me my salami sandwich, I'd say, gimme never gets, okay? Where's the polite please in this? And we could tell stories, and she told the most wonderful stories of, growing up here and walking along the wharf when it was a working fishing village, and the fishermen singing arias while mending their nets. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. My son answered the door, and then all of a sudden I heard him go, oh, fuck. And then he came into my room and said, look at these papers. There have been over 68 people who have been forced out in one way or another, just in my immediate neighborhood over the last few years.
Thank you so much. This is so wrong, and this is a beautiful community here in North Beach. We have gone through so much together. My building mates, Margaret and Jeff. I can't tell you how quiet it is without them. I don't hear her. No, not that they were noisy, okay?
Since World War II, San Francisco has been a relatively stable city with a population of about 750,000 people. And in the last handful of years, because of the tech boom, as well as because of a huge amount of both domestic and foreign capital looking for a place to land, San Francisco has grown by some 80,000 people. And in addition to that, has become the place to invest. And it is akin literally to the gold rush of 1849. And there are fortunes to be made, and there are fortunes that can become even greater if one is willing to evict people.
When you look at this building, and there was an illegal owner move-in eviction, and the fact that City Hall did nothing about it says that City Hall is culpable. It is time to change the dynamic at City Hall. If you want to play by the rules, then play by the rules, and if you don't play by the rules, there has to be consequences. This is an epidemic. It is ripping apart not only this community, it is ripping apart every community, and they are real communities. Enough is enough. How much is enough?
My grandkids were so worried that they were going to kick me out, so they went down to Mission and they bought me these bracelets. One is not to kick me out, now to keep the lady away from me. This is to the judge will feel sorry for me. And this is not to get sick because of what this lady's doing. So I'm wearing this all the time. So maybe my grandkids will, you know, the young kids, the innocents, maybe they'll help me. I immigrated from South America when I was 12 years old to San Francisco, and I immigrated when I was little, so it was my father, my family, you know, they all came to the United States, so that's what he came for, a better way of living. Oh, Guerrero Street was great. I mean, you know, it was the time that everybody knew each other. We have reunions in the community. We don't have to pay babysitter because we trust each other. We leave our cars open. To me, it's my neighborhood. This is my son, right here. Look, here when he won the California championship. The only one from San Francisco. Proud mama, huh? $1980, look at how many years. She took the yacht away from me. She took my storage away from me. We didn't have mail for a month and a half. We have to go every day to Bryan Station to pick up our mail because she took the key from the entrance for the mail carrier. We didn't have alarm. We didn't have bell. I live in the 3rd floor. So every time somebody come to my house, I have to go down. When they ring, we didn't have no bell. So I missed medications. I lost medications because they returned the medications because nobody opened the door. This is glass. She took the glass and they put this, I don't know why.
Like she wants my grandma to get depressed or something because this is very depressing. This used to be a window.
That's a window.
It used to be like a huge, like you could have light coming in here. So now she's making us, you know, whatever, use the light and everything, but it's just a really depressing scene.
The rich cannot be with the poor, without the poor. We are poor. We are, you know, low middle class people. And that's what they attacking the low middle class people. What are they going to do without us? Who's going to take care of their kids? Who's going to take care of their houses?
Right now, it is so hard to find out every day that more and more people are being evicted. We are so sick and tired. We live here, we work so hard, all of us, and I know you care. Please, come up and help us.
I've lived here for 38 years. My dad just wanted to actually have a better opportunity for us. I'm actually the oldest and 7 children. Yes, and it's a big responsibility. Yeah. You know, I thought, you know, America was, you know, that all of America was actually like Montana. Full of trees, you know, roads, and autumn leaves and all that, because those were the pictures that I actually have seen in a lot of magazines, you know, 4 Seasons, and we thought, you know, that I thought that we were going to live in some sort of a similar environment that we had, you know, in Cebu, Philippines. The Filipino-American lady who actually owned this building passed away. We were still fine until Uncle Randy, her husband, passed away. That's when all hell went loose. One day, we didn't have any water. No water. So that's when, you know, when I was going around, saying, oh my God, what should I do? And I'm what's going to happen to my family? We don't want, our family to be out on the streets. The developers are cashing in because they know that they can actually control City Hall. So they know that they can actually take care and get what they want with City Hall. And developers right now are just taking advantage of the opportunity. And it's because a lot of these tech companies or other companies that are coming into the scheme of things here in the city, destroying our culture, destroying our landscape, destroying the affordability here in San Francisco, destroying the codes and all the propositions and laws that we've worked so hard that they want to go around it. And we're not going to allow them to do that.
What tension? The only tension I know of is between the Dodgers and the Giants. That's the tension I want to deal with. I'm excited to be here this morning. I'm excited to be in the room. And, as I briefly look around, there are great developers who are working in the city, designing wonderful green office buildings, residential buildings, art buildings. I am, in my life, the most excited during this time of the city of San Francisco. Trades are up. I see them. I feel them. They're there. Whenever there are strong winds, I'm worried about those trades. Hundreds of thousands of square feet of new development housing are certainly on the way, and because of our good economy, we're making record investments in everything, from education, to transportation, to public safety, and to our historically strong social safety net.
People have a relatively fixed notion about supply and demand, and while there are truths about supply and demand, it is actually much more complicated than you can build your way out of a housing crisis. Supply is not just adding more houses, it's actually about preserving what you have. And as this administration and Ed Lee speak about the need to build tens of thousands of new units, existing units are being cannibalized under their noses with their absolute support. I represented the oldest corner of the city where buildings all touch, where mostly there are 3 units or more per lot, per building. It also happens to be the area that tourists flock to. When people think of San Francisco, they think of the cable cars, they think of Chinatown, they think of Coit Tower, and they think of, the Fisherman's Wharf. There are some compelling reasons to preserve the physical edifices here and the people that live in them.
I lived here in this place for about 30 years, but I live another 15 years across the street where the place was sold, and I moved here with my wife, who passed away about 3 years ago. I live alone now. It's tough, but I try to manage it. Good thing I found a new love in my life. I discovered poetry. And they call me a poet. I'm not a poet. I try to find a way to fight my loneliness. Evening by Diego de Leo. Late in the evening, the day done, good and evil dormant, a lighter rest, sliding into nothingness, while the moon replaced the sun to watch over me. How do you like that? I'm lonely, but I love it, loneliness, because if I wasn't lonely, I wouldn't be able to to express the feeling that I have. I was born in Italy. I worked with my father in the farm. And as you know, people ask me, why did you come to America? Well, everybody wants to come to America. I drove a cab for a number of years. I stopped in a restaurant in Fisherman's Wharf where my wife worked. I met her. I dated for a short while, and we married. And we've been married for 36 years before she passed away 3 years ago. The building was sold, and the owner, now the present owner, he served me with the eviction notice about a year and a half ago, but I'm fighting it. I'm fighting it, and so far I'm winning. It's difficult to go any place and get adjusted to another neighborhood, the store, and people. You don't make friends when you're 8 years old. It's going to be a downer. Right now, it become a health issue. I think about what's going to happen, where am I going to go. Let's hope that I continue to win.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks.
See some claps there. So we now have time where we can open this up for questions for Rebecca. And you can put those in the chat. I also think that we're a small enough group that you can certainly just unmute yourself if you want and say your question, or if you want to put a hand up, we're going to try to also see that in the participants list as well. I will start off with a question for Rebecca. So I think, I'm very much struck by the people that were interviewed, and I was curious sort of how you identified and connected with them, if that was strictly through your role in the San Francisco tenant organizing, or kind of also what your process was for, interviewing them and including them.
Yeah. So I didn't know the 4 tenants facing eviction before I started the film, but you're exactly right. I was connected with them through my previous housing work. I had spent about a year in Santa Cruz in my grad program, so I wasn't necessarily involved in their eviction fights, which were going on like at that moment and within that year. But so I reached out to, I had a lot of, connections, obviously, old colleagues and friends still doing housing work. And I reached out to friends at the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, which I can, put the link in a bit later because it's a really interesting organization. But they were doing like a series of oral histories for people who were having housing issues or just living in San Francisco for a long time, or different organizers, and placing those interviews on the website. So I reached out to them asking, who had they interviewed before and who might feel like comfortable being on camera to talk about their eviction fights. And I will say that they were really receptive, because I had been involved in the tenants' rights movement prior. And so I, understood the issue really well. And I had been working with so many tenants that were dealing with similar issues. So I know, that was a really big plus for me compared to others who are making documentaries and just kind of like approaching issues for the first time. It was much more difficult to kind of find people to work with.
Thanks, Rebecca. I could ask more questions about that, but Elizabeth in the chat has asked, do you know what is happening regarding evictions in San Francisco now? Is it more of the same, or have things improved at all?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, I would say. So the way that they were all experiencing evictions, so San Francisco has rent control and eviction protections, which like we don't have here in Merced and in a lot of cities. So they were all living in rent-controlled housing in apartments, but they were experiencing no-fault evictions, which means that there are certain, in the rent control law, there are certain reasons that you can be evicted for no fault of your own. But what was happening during this like tech boom and during this eviction crisis is that these no-fault evictions were being used as like kind of tools for speculation, and to like evict people and then sell the building for more money, because buildings sell more if there are no tenants in them, things like that. So there have been since then a lot of like policy work done, and a lot of that has happened like through the activism to try to put limits on some of these no-fault evictions, and to kind of try to close some of the loopholes and make landlords who are practicing kind of bad practices more accountable. So there was kind of like a period that was really bad, and it's kind of gotten a little bit better. I will say that from what I've heard about San Francisco currently is that due to COVID, a lot of like tech workers and people moved out of the city because they didn't need to work, like live near where they worked. And so that kind of brought prices down and then brought evictions down. And then of course there's been like local, state, and national, federal tenant protections for COVID. So evictions have actually stopped, and there have been like programs that help tenants pay rent if they've been laid off during COVID. But I don't know the specifics because I've kind of been out of the loop, but I do know that some of these protections are ending. So a lot of the activists that I know in San Francisco are trying to figure out how to help tenants as soon as all these protections go away, to make sure that they're not like facing an eviction right away, or all their, that they have enough money to kind of like square things up with their landlords and things like that. So it's kind of an odd time to kind of know if things are improving overall because of the COVID situation.
Kelly, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Rebecca. That was really interesting to watch. And I wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, like, it seems like there was an added layer where like, it's one thing to serve these eviction notices, but it seems like there was this added layer of like harassment where like the water was being turned off, yards and spaces were being taken over. Can you talk a little bit more about like what happens with that, or what happened in those situations?
Yeah, there's a term that's used like in the tenant rights community called like self evictions, or like self evicting. And this again is like much more common in places where there are like tenant protections like San Francisco, because if you don't have tenant, rent control or eviction protection, you can just kind of be evicted at at a whim. But if you don't have like the legal means to evict, but you want your tenants out, and so something else I'll say about rent control is, if you live in a rent controlled unit, your rent can go up incrementally. It's tied to like inflation and things like that. But as soon as a unit becomes empty, the landlord can then raise the rent back, like to market level. It can't be absurd, but can bring the rent up. So there's like a huge incentive to try to get tenants out. But if you don't have a legal reason to evict, well, what do some of these kind of like bad actors do? They try to harass their tenants out of the building. So actually what's really interesting about a lot of these tenants, like Teresa Flanger, so there's two Teresas, but the Teresa lives in North Beach and Sylvia, who lives in the Mission, everyone else had already left their building. Like they were like through harassment and like illegal evictions, but they were the fighters, or we're not leaving. We're going to live through all this harassment. They kind of got set up with the tenants union and other housing organizations to try to figure out how to fight the harassment. But it's just used as a tool to just kick tenants out when they don't have a legal means to do so. And as you can see, it's like really detrimental. It can be a health issue. It can just be really devastating. And a lot of these tenants are older. And so, the harassment is really devastating. And for some, for a lot of people, they just end up leaving because they can't handle it anymore. But this was kind of like a special bunch who were just living through all the harassment.
Other questions out there?
I was wondering if you have kept in touch with the individuals in the film. And what a great film.
Yeah. It's been a little hard recently. So Teresa Flandrick, the first tenant you saw, who lives in North Beach, and you saw at the end that she became a housing organizer herself. She was like a retired nurse, and she is still in 2021 a full-time tenant organizer. She works for an organization called Senior and Disability Action Network. So, actually, when I finished the film and finished the grad program, I did move back to San Francisco for a little bit and was working on housing issues again. So she actually became a colleague of mine, which was really cool. And so I've seen her the most just because we kind of were plugged into like the same work. And Diego, I would, meet up with from time to time in North Beach and kind of see how he's doing. He's just a little update on some of them. So he actually did, and sometimes just the fighting might delay an eviction, so for Diego, he did buy more time. And there was an agreement made where he had to leave the unit that he was in, but the landlord put him in another unit that was small, definitely not as good, but it was it's better than him like being on the street or having to go to a new neighborhood or kind of just be like totally uprooted from his community. So he's doing well and still reading poetry and things like that. And definitely his eviction fight made him like much more known around San Francisco. And so has been invited to a lot of different events and things like that. I think he's kind of slowed down recently just because of his age. And then, Teresa, who lives in Soma, as you saw, due to her fighting, she is still in the unit with her family. I haven't talked to her recently, but her whole family is very involved in her neighborhood organizing. There's a large Filipino population there, so they're all doing well. Sylvia, I've probably been the least in touch with. Her landlord was particularly evil. And actually the city attorney got involved. He placed a restraining order where she wasn't allowed to go near, and she owned many buildings too. She just was like buying up buildings and harassing, evicting So there was a restraining order, so she had stop like the physical, not the physical harassment, but just like the face-to-face stuff. And I believe, I don't know if she's had to sell her buildings, but she's definitely not allowed to like own property. I think she was like sued, like, has paid tenants like a lot of money, like settlements, like, so it was like a long legal battle. And I should check in with her soon, but I'm pretty sure Sylvia is still in the same unit, again, because of the activism, because of the fighting back, getting organizations involved, hooking up with different lawyers and things like that. And Teresa from North Beach, the first one, she actually now rents from Aaron Peskin, the San Francisco politician who's in the film. So he is now her landlord, and is a really good landlord. So.
This isn't so much a question, but I guess something that struck me that Aaron Peskin said was this concept of like preserving what we have versus trying to build your way out of housing crises. And I'm sure that's something that could be unpacked a lot more and maybe has more resonance in some of these like bigger cities that have these very long histories. But I don't know if that struck you too, Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, so there's, so many different sides to these debates about building and building market rate versus 100% affordable housing and things like that. A lot of like the build people think that any type of housing, whether it's like luxury condos or market rate housing, that if you just build it all, it's going to relieve the housing crisis, because they think that, tenants who are living in rent control units who really can afford a luxury condo are somehow going to move into this luxury condo that's being built. And then there's going to be like an affordable unit that's now available for like a low income tenant. But that's just not really how it works, especially in a place like San Francisco. A lot of like the more affordable, not affordable kind of like market rate or luxury units either become like second homes. The tech industry was growing so much that there was just still so many people coming into the city. So it's not like all of these affordable units are like opening up based on this new construction. And then also like a lot, people don't, they want to stay in their rent controlled unit either because they like the building, they like the neighborhood, they want to pay low rent, so definitely, yeah. So I think, Aaron Peskin is referring to kind of the complexities that you don't just build and solve the housing crisis. It's much more complicated than that. And that has been the narrative for like a lot of developers or kind of like pro developer politicians and things like that. But we've seen that it doesn't work that way. And, something that, like the tenants union and other groups that I've worked with are advocating for is the construction of just 100% affordable housing. A building that's just the whole thing is affordable housing, because there's not a lot of affordable housing that's just being built.
Rebecca, there's a question from Elizabeth Salmon, which says, could you speak more about the role of affordable housing trusts? I was happy to hear that Teresa could stay in her house due to one.
Yeah, I'm definitely no expert on housing trusts, but I'm really interested in them. So there's a San Francisco Community Land Trust, and what they do is try to raise the funds for if a building comes on the market. They try to raise the funds to compete with other investors, banks, investors, to try to buy the building. And then it would be owned by the Community Land Trust. I don't know the specifics, but basically what happens is then there's kind of like a lottery system for people who want to move into a land trust unit. And basically the land trust owns the land, but then you own the unit and you're kind of in cooperation with others in the building. and it's basically like a 99-year lease. So that you get by moving in. And if someone moves out, it remains affordable. There's no incentive to like increase the price or anything like that, because it's now owned by the land trust. Anyone can be a member, a supporter of the land trust. And once a building becomes land trusted, it pretty much just remains affordable. The city also has a housing fund. So something that, I believe this is a city law, but if a developer gets approved to build market rate housing, the city says you either have to build a certain percent affordable on site, or you can put that money into a housing trust fund that's that the city holds on to. And the idea is that the city is then supposed to kind of have their own like trust where they can buy properties and make them affordable. However, that kind of just sits there. And that was like something that was another point of contention, is that like developers didn't want to build any market rate affordable housing on site. So they would just give some money to City Hall, but then City Hall wasn't actually like building or buying properties to be managed by their own trust. So those are kind of some of like the housing trust options. I really like the kind of community land trust model. And I know people that live in like units that are owned by the land trust in San Francisco, and it's a really good model. And it basically takes housing off of the market permanently. So it's no longer part of like just the housing market. It becomes permanently affordable.
Other questions?
Can you talk a little bit more about the reception of the film, or after it was produced, its life, you know, and how has it opened up other conversations or been used by organizations?
Yeah, I think my favorite method of screening the film after, like, especially, you know, kind of directly after it was made, was kind of more in like community events for different like organizations that deal with housing, or with like tenants that, you know, people that are coming together to learn about their rights and things like that. It's been really, I think, has kind of inspired a lot of like tenants to realize that that like if you do kind of like fight back or get help, get a lawyer, get counseling, that there are options for you. And so I've really enjoyed just kind of like the kind of community meeting screening. So I did that a lot with different like organizations in San Francisco. Also, just like my sister is on this Zoom right now, and I was in Seattle, and we just screened it in her living room with like a lot of her friends who are in Seattle. And that's another city that's like experiencing really similar things. Like Amazon is there and Microsoft is there. And so that was really great because, you know, like they don't have the same, I think, kind of like history of tenant organizing. So it was just really great to just like educate a group of people about what could happen in their city, or like what is happening in Seattle. So it also really like translates well to other cities. So I've kind of liked the smaller kind of like little like screen like this, you know, is really nice. Did go to a few like film festivals, particularly film festivals that are focusing on like workers' rights, because I think that like housing and, you know, workers' rights and housing rights are very similar. If you don't have, you know, stable housing, it's hard to go to work, it's hard to, you know, go to school. It's like all these issues are kind of like interconnected. And so it was like, you know, more well received in like next to other kind of like more labor focused films.
This is Rebecca, a little bit more back to the process, but some of us were listening to presentations last week related to oral histories and the whole interviewing aspect. And I was wondering, like, even for this, like, how long did you do these interviews to get the footage just for the documentary? Or like, what was your role as the interviewer? Like, do you come with specific questions, or is it really organic, like kind of behind the scenes of thinking about making a documentary?
Yeah, so a little bit of both in terms of being prepared and having it be organic. But so also I should say, like, I did, I think, like 10 really long form oral history interviews with tenants and also like organizers. So obviously, some of those did not make it into the film at all. But definitely, I think with every tenant, we did an interview for over 2 hours, and like just a few minutes made it in. So my questions were really like focused on. So I mentioned in the intro that I was interested in oral histories and like delving a lot deeper, and so a lot of my questions had to do with like well, and also I think I think 3 out of the 4 tenants in the film were all immigrated from another country. So I was really interested in like how they ended up in San Francisco and why, and how was that experience, and like how did you end up in this unit? And I really wanted to hear from them the importance of like their actual apartment and like the stuff in the apartment, like Sylvia kind of like looking through her scrapbooks and things like that. Because and like the neighborhood, what the streets are like. Because I think if you understand those details, then you understand the destructiveness of the eviction itself. It's not just like this many people have been evicted. And there's not really any like faces or stories behind it. So, I've really, in Diego talking about how it's really like a health issue to be evicted. And you can see that, like how he kind of, he's in his 80s. So I really wanted to portray just like not just ask questions about the eviction, but just like about their lives. Cause I think that was like, that really helps to understand the story. So I did have a list of questions that first were about just their lives, and then also going into the eviction. And then, with every interview, I always leave it very open-ended. Like, is there anything else you want to add? So I think I would go into their house. We set up the sit-down interview. That would take a couple hours. I'd do like a little bit of filming in the house then, but then I would usually go back to get some like additional footage of them just like showing me things and walking around the apartment, or like, that scene with Sylvia's grandson, those types of like B-roll shots. And so it would usually be like a couple of times, or if I knew that they were, because again, they were all actively like fighting their eviction at the time. So if I knew there was a rally, or they were speaking somewhere where there was something like really relevant to them, that I would make sure I would get that too. But they were very long interviews for just like a short 20-minute film.
I suspect that is very common in doing this kind of work. So did you, Rebecca, like with those 10, you decided sort of afterwards that you would use from 4 individuals?
Yeah, I definitely wanted, different neighborhoods, because if you're in San Francisco, the neighborhoods are very distinct and specific, and they're, they have different issues going on in different communities. So I definitely wanted it to be about the city as a whole and not just one neighborhood. So that was a factor. And like I said, I'd interviewed some like organizers, some others doing the actual work, but then realized that I just really, I thought Aaron Peskins. I thought his interview was like really important, and he had some really good contextual information. And also he definitely, you know, because I think of like, you know, there's City Hall, there's like the developers, and then there's like the tenants. So I thought that having that City Hall voice was really important. Supervisors in San Francisco are also the city council. It's like, it's kind of the same role because it's a city county. So so I kept him, but I didn't want to, I decided not to include like the other longer organizer interviews because I did really just want to focus on the tenants themselves. And I think I just picked those, you know, they were just really compelling interviews. They were more active in fighting their eviction at the time. So I went with those four.
That makes sense. Other questions or comments? Elizabeth's asking if you plan to make other films to follow up on this one.
Yeah, so after making that film, and I was in San Francisco for a little bit after that, I did some like video work for organizations, like different went to different events, and you know, put the, like I mentioned, the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project which is an organization that was doing a lot of work. So I kind of like made a short film for them, just covering an event that they did and things like that. So I kind of was just doing a little bit of like gig work. There was a regional, like a Bay Area organization that was making a film on what was happening with like Google in San Jose, and Google was coming into San Jose, and you know, a lot of people were worried about evictions and things like that there. So I did some more like video work for that film. It kind of ended when I moved to Rochester and went back to school again. I have not been very active, but I'm not sure. I don't think I'll make a follow-up film about this one in particular. If anything, I would just kind of update what is going on with the tenants that are in the film. Just, you know, it's a little, I made it in 2016. So obviously their lives have changed since then. So that might be the extent of it, but I'd like to make other films about other things as well at some point.
So I'll just give a moment if anyone else has a final question or comment. Well, thanks so much, Rebecca, for sharing your work with us. It's always fun to see what people have worked on, and you're like a wealth of knowledge about that area and having your experience both making the film, but also working on the ground with folks in this area. So thanks again. And also we're looking, as I mentioned earlier, to doing something in the spring where we can also maybe bring together some other individuals to talk more about housing, and maybe also kind of our local housing situation, which has also had its own challenges. And Kelly just dropped into the chat, sort of Rebecca has a website which also links out to the documentary, so you can also share it with others or view it again. I know sometimes we kind of pick up on different things looking at it a second time. So great. Thanks again for joining us. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and we hope to see you at another event.
Thanks, everyone.